So I'll just give a very quick summary of what I think the COP will focus on, and noting that there's always surprises, and also just noticing that Frank seems to have just joined the call as well. So from my perspective, the way the COP is being branded is variously it's been called Africa's COP, but also sometimes called the commitment COP, so which is taking promises into the stage of commitments. And those commitments can be of different types or are of different types. So for example, there's commitments made under the Paris Agreement in terms of climate adaptation, which is beefing up the ability to deal with the sort of extreme events, for example, that we're seeing happening right across the world at the moment. Last year in Glasgow, there was a 2-year program which was laid out for doing that, sort of increasing the focus on climate adaptation. And I think at this COP, there will essentially be a progress report on that. And of course, the focus on adaptation is particularly critical this year due to the whole raft of different extreme events that we've seen. So the floods in Pakistan and in Europe, sort of big storms in the Philippines, the China heat wave, potentially the worst heat wave on record, our floods here in Australia, etc. And part of that will be looking at solutions. So what can we do about all of these different extremes? And so focusing on those. There's clearly a big element of addressing loss and damage. So this is essentially addressing the additional risks and damage associated with climate events, particularly focused by developing country, and essentially the developing nations, the group of 2077 and China have essentially requested that loss and damage be formally included in the agenda in ways which were additional to those which were agreed at Glasgow. And of course, that will take consensus from all parties to actually put it on the agenda. And that could be a significant sticking point because there's a block of countries who are not necessarily keen on addressing this in the way that the developing countries want to be addressed. There'll be a big element of climate finance, and I suspect Jackie and Frank will talk about this, but delivering on the promises for climate finance, both the mitigation and the adaptation finance. There's some other elements sitting in there, which will be pursuing the establishment of a global carbon market. Potentially something that might pop up is strengthening the commitments to reduce coal use. And that will be particularly notable this year because coal use has actually increased because of the war in Ukraine. And there's lastly a point that I'll cover, which is about COP will be preparing for next year's global stocktake. So that's the assessment of collective progress on emission reduction, on adaptation, and on the various other elements of the Paris Agreement. So I'll just leave it there for the moment, Lyndall.